Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another workshop from me, Kieran Williams. I am one of your English language support tutors here on the Manchester campus of Elizabeth School of London. So today we are going to be talking about academic reading. So we're going to look at those skills that will really help you to get the most out of your reading during your course here. All right, so without further ado, we're going to have a look at the agenda for today, then we're going to have a look at a little introduction, and then we will move on from there, and hopefully we will learn those skills, all different types of academic reading, so that you can perform to your best. All right, so the first thing, the agenda. So we're going to begin by looking at an introduction to academic reading. Okay, what is it? How is it different from normal reading? Then we're going to have a look at the types of academic texts. Because they're not all of the same, we really should be reading them in different ways. Talking about reading in different ways, we're going to be looking at reading strategies, so those different types of skills you are going to be using while reading. After that, we're going to be looking at academic vocabulary, so what you can do if you're unsure about that vocabulary and the ways that you can take the meaning without really looking at dictionaries, things like that. Then we are going to move on to note-taking and summarising. So when you are reading, hopefully you are taking notes. And we're looking at how you can then use those notes and how you can summarise what you have read in order to get a full understanding of the text. Then we're going to have a look at dealing with difficult texts. Okay, so those really fiendishly difficult, tricky ones. And then we will finish up with some tools and resources that you can use going forward. Okay, so first things then, introduction to academic reading. Okay, so a couple of reflective questions to begin with. Okay. So you may have just started your academic journey here at Elizabeth School of London. Maybe you're halfway through, maybe you're near the end. Who knows? Hopefully you know. And you will understand that academic reading is a must here because you're studying a bachelor's degree or something similar. So the first question to think of is, why do we need to read so much in academia? Okay, so have a little think about that one. And another question then, what are the differences between academic reading and general reading? You know, the reading that you do in everyday life, you know, reading text messages, reading an online website about the news, okay? What are the differences between those two? So have a little think, pause the video, explore your brain, and then hopefully you have some answers and you're screaming them at the screen. Sadly, I can't actually hear them, but we'll tackle some of your comments in the next slide. Okay. So, reading in academia. This goes beyond just reading for fun or reading to find out where your train is leaving from, okay? Because what you need to do is analyze what you read, synthesize it, we'll look at this later on, and we will critically evaluate the text that we have just done. Okay, so that's three different skills, three different reasons for you reading, but let's think about how you can actually use them. So first of all, and possibly the most important thing, is to build your knowledge. Okay, you know, you're reading these in order to get more information so you can do your assignment, so you can then move on. And like we just said then, that does support your assignments, but it can also support any other research that you're doing. Also, reading, academic reading, helps to develop your critical thinking. So you're always thinking about the advantages and the disadvantages. What are the cause and effects of certain things? Okay. And also academic reading helps you to engage in a wider scholarly discourse. So if you meet some other academics, some people from other universities, some people on different courses, you can still talk about the subjects because you have read about them in the articles or journals or online things like that. So the other question was, what is the difference between your normal reading and academic reading? Well, they kind of break up into four different parts. The purpose. When you're reading a magazine, you're just reading it for fun. Here at Elizabeth School of London, you're reading something in order to gain some information or to get some insight. Okay, so there is that difference between reading for fun and reading to learn something. Also, the text structure changes. Okay, what it is in a newspaper or a magazine or on one of your social media sites, the text is ordered in a different way to what it is in academic reading. All right. Also, in academic reading, there is much more dense or much denser information. Okay, so there's a lot more information included in it that you'll need to learn or you'll need to remember. Also, think about objectivity and subjectivity. Okay, so if you're reading a magazine, it's usually going to be subjective. It's going to tell you to watch a film because that film is amazing and you should definitely watch it. But it is much more objective in academic reading because they are trying to persuade you, trying to convince you rather than telling you to do something. Okay, so those are, in essence, the main differences there. Okay, so let's have a look at the next thing then. Let's have a look at the types of academic texts that we have and how this influences how we read them. Okay, so the first thing that you're probably going to be reading a lot of are research papers and journal articles. Okay, so these can often be quite long, okay, and quite boring. I mean, they are going to be, okay? We just have to get used to it. But there are still some strategies that we can use in order to make them easier to read, and so we can be more effective and more efficient in how we read. So the first thing you should do is skim the abstract first. So remember, the abstract is the first paragraph in essence, and it tells us about what the paper or article is about in general. Okay, so it is a very quick summary of what that is about. So instead of reading the whole journal at the start, reading the whole article at the start, you can read the abstract just to get the general idea. That will then help you to understand if you need to read the rest of it, or it's not useful, move on to another one. Okay, so make sure you use those abstracts first to then help you to decide if you need to move on. Okay, if we move across to the right, if you're looking at textbooks and course books, so these may be those paper ones in our learning resource centres across our different campuses, what you can do is, because it is a book, again, you don't have to start on the first page and read all the way through to the back page. You can always skim chapters, okay? There may be some chapters you don't need to use, you don't need to read, okay? So skip over them. But you can also have a look at the headings, subheadings, anything that is in bold in order to get a general idea of what the text is about. Once you've done that, then you can read into that a little bit more. But make sure you save your time by looking at headings, looking at the chapter titles, things like that. Okay, going into the bottom left, we can see that there are reports, essays, and case studies. Okay, so again, you're never completely sure if this is relevant to what you're looking to understand. So make sure you read the introduction first and read the conclusion just to get the general overall ideas. Okay, and specifically for reports, reports usually have a recommendation section. Okay, so usually if you are looking for that kind of stuff about future plans or things like that, have a look at the recommendation setting where it will recommendation section where it will highlight the most important information from the report. Also, if you're having a look at digital or online sources, remember that this opens a lot more opportunities, a lot more tools for you. So make sure that you use the search functions like Control F. Then you will be able to search within the text for any specific words or phrases that you are looking for. Moving on then. Okay, so those were about the different texts, what we can do with those different types of text. Let's have a look in a more general style then of our reading strategies, because people read in different ways. People read with specific strategies for specific situations. So maybe you noticed this already, maybe you haven't, but on the next slides, we're going to see those different ones. Okay. So we're going to be having a look here at skimming and scanning. They may seem like they are the same, but they are actually quite different. They're almost opposite in some ways. Okay, so we're going to begin with skimming. Skimming is when you are, again, if you're reading a magazine, okay, and you're just looking for something to grab your attention, something that looks interesting or exciting, okay? You're not reading every word, your eyes are just quickly going through it, looking to see if there is anything that jumps out at you. Okay, so this is an example of skimming, because generally what you are doing is going from the start to the end, and you're not reading every word, but you're trying to get a general idea of what the text is about. Okay, all right. So this gives us a sense of what the text is like, what the content is, what the structure is, and what the main ideas are. Okay. So skimming in that sense helps you to decide in which part of the text the main information that you need is going to be. Okay, because you've got a general idea of what the whole text is about, then you can focus on different sections. So again, you can do this by looking at subheadings, headings, the starting paragraph, the introduction or the conclusion, anything that is bolded or anything that is italicized. Okay, so then these help you to really focus in on the information later on. Okay, so really you're doing this on your first look, basically, to understand if something is relevant, if you actually need to read it, or if you can just forget about it and move on to something else. Now, scanning is the opposite. This is where you're looking for specific information from the start. Okay, so again, you are not reading every word because you're not reading to kind of understand. You're reading to find one specific piece of information. Okay. So in this sense, because you're looking for something specific, you're looking for key words, you're looking for specific numbers or dates or something like this. Okay, so your eyes should be doing something like that as you read through it. Okay, you can look at a whole page maybe in 5 seconds or 10 seconds. Okay, because if I'm looking for information about, stock market crash in whenever it was, 1929, okay, you don't need to read every single word. You are just looking for the 1929 reference. Okay, so your eyes just do that until I found 1929. It's there. Then you read around it. Then you read it in more detail. Okay, all right. So this is what you do when you're in the train station. Okay, maybe you are looking for the platform for the train that is going to Leeds at 5:30. Okay, so you know that you only need to look for Leeds, you only need to look for 5:30, etc. Okay, so there is lots of information on the board, but you are just looking for that specific information. And this is the type of reading that you're doing when you are studying. Now, when you're in the train station, it's quite difficult because there are many, many boards. But if you're on a computer or something like that, you can just Control F and use your digital search tools in order to find those words. If it is a book, again, you can look at the contents page, you can look at the index at the back, or you can look at chapter titles or headings, things like that. All right, so this is particularly useful when you already know what information you are looking for, or you're just trying to prove some information. Okay. So generally, when you're doing your academic reading for an assignment, you are going to include some skimming, some scanning at different times. Okay, another reading activity you need to think about is something called active reading. So this is not just passively reading something, taking the information in. Active reading is taking it for one more step. This is deeply engaging with what you have read, and you can retain it more. You can keep that information longer in your head if you interact with the text that you have just read. So this includes things like annotating. Okay, hopefully not in a book, but if you photocopied it, you can write notes on it. You can put symbols next to it, highlighting, writing little notes in the corner. So this shows that you are actively reading. Okay, you can do this on the computer. If you've read an article, you can make some notes on Word, and then you can then find them later on. Okay, and this shows that you are actively reading. Okay, so sometimes you need to be thinking about What does the author mean here? What is their argument? What evidence do they have for their argument? Do you think that they are being objective or subjective? So these kinds of questions help you to stay engaged and help you to understand the text more. So once you've read a paragraph or 3 paragraphs or something like that, make sure you just take a couple of seconds to think about what you have read, see if you could summarize that information in your own head. Imagine that you have to describe it to your friend. How would you do that? How would you describe this author's arguments? Okay. Right. So you're mostly going to be doing active reading when you're really looking in depth because you need to know what the author's argument is. You need to know how they have got to this argument. Okay, so this is when it is that more in-depth reading. So it could be when you're preparing for one of your exams, when you've got an assignment coming up, or if you're having a seminar when you need to discuss what you have read. Okay, so the next thing we're going to have a look at is something a little bit more abstract, shall we say? And this is the SQ3R method. So it is S and then the 3 Qs. Okay, oh sorry, it is S, the Q, and then the 3 Rs, which is survey, question, read, recite, and review. So in some sense, this is quite similar to active reading. It is a little bit different though, and this is kind of a systematic approach to reading, where you understand, you keep the information, and it is easier to understand more complex or difficult texts. Okay, so the first letter S, this is for survey, okay, or survey. This starts with you skimming the text. We talked about skimming before. Okay, so skimming the text to get an overall idea. Okay, so you're looking at all of the information, not just what is written in the body, but looking at headings, titles, summaries, visuals to get a general idea of what the text is about. Then what you're going to be doing is questioning. So you're going to create some questions in your head based on what you have just skim read. Okay, so try to turn those headings that you looked at into questions in order to get a purpose for your reading. Okay, now the next thing, the R, the first R, read. This is quite obvious. Okay, this is when you're going to read the text quite carefully in a lot of detail, focusing on those questions that you've already created in your head. So you should be focusing on details, arguments, and evidence. Okay, what are they trying to say? How do they explain it? And what evidence do they have to agree with it? Then the second R is recite. Okay, so after you have read something, see if you can, in your own words, describe what the main point is. Okay, so it means that you've not just read it, you've understood it to the extent that you're able to tell other people about it. And then we come to the final R, which is review. So this is looking back at the text again and looking back at your notes in order to consolidate what you have learned, to really make sure that it is kept inside your head. Okay, so look for any connections between ideas and see if you were confused. Maybe looking at it again can help to make you understand it a bit clearer. Okay, so again, this is very similar to the last one. It is particularly useful when you're looking at some details in depth. Okay, so on to the next one. We're going to be having a look at critical reading. Okay, so this is when you're not just taking in information, but you're analyzing it, evaluating it, understanding it, looking at its implications. What does this, what are the results of looking at this information? What does it tell us? Okay, so the way that we do this is, first of all, identify the thesis. So what is the central argument that the author is trying to get across to you? And what is their purpose for doing it? Okay, then we examine the evidence. What kind of evidence do they have to support their idea? Is their data up to date? Does it actually show what they think it shows? Etc. Also, we need to have a look at any bias the author may have. Are they subjective or are they objective, like we're hoping for? So you could consider their background, consider who they work for, consider who has paid them, that kind of stuff, okay? And do they present a balanced idea, or do you think that they have an agenda? We should then, after looking at that, consider their logic and reasoning. Do their ideas connect together well? Is it logical? Is it coherent? Is there anything that maybe they have missed? And then after you have been able to do all of those things, then you can actually focus on your own opinion of what they have said. Okay, so in general, do you agree or disagree with the person? Why do you agree or disagree? Do you notice some strengths about what they said? Do you notice some weaknesses about what they have put forward? Okay, so this is when you are considering stuff more in a theoretical sense. Okay, so this could be for essay writing, it could be for debates, it could be for presentations, things like that. All right, so it's easy talking about your strategies for reading, but sometimes you come to a difficult word and you don't know what to do with that difficult word. So you need to understand there's always going to be some difficult vocabulary, but when you understand this difficult vocabulary, then you will be able to better understand what you have just read and engage with it and be critical about it. Okay, so making sure you have a deep knowledge of academic vocabulary is super important when it comes to academic reading. So let's imagine you're reading a text and you come to a difficult word. You could use a translator, but they aren't always perfect. We're definitely not going to use AI because that is forbidden in general. Okay, so what we can do is look at the context in which that word appears in order to help us to understand it. Okay, so there are three different ways that we could do this without even having to consider a dictionary. So the first thing we can do is maybe there is a clue which tells us the definition of the word. So imagine we're reading and we come across the word epigenetics. Like, oh my word, what could epigenetics mean? Well, sometimes the author is really useful because after they've used a difficult word, they then explain the meaning of that word immediately afterwards. So they give you the definition of the word after the word that they have just given. So if you look in this example, epigenetics, the study of changes in organisms caused by gene expression rather than alterations in the DNA sequence, has gained prominence, then we know what epigenetics is. Okay, because we've got the definition right there. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is the synonym clue. This is when you have a difficult word and then immediately after that word, you then have a synonym for that word, a word with a similar meaning. So in this example, the project was arduous or extremely difficult, but they persevered. So we know that arduous, because it's given a synonym afterwards, means extremely difficult. Okay, but academic reading doesn't have to be arduous if we follow these skills. Okay, so sometimes we get a synonym, sometimes we get an antonym. So remember, an antonym is the opposite meaning of a word. Okay, so sometimes it gives us the opposite in order to understand what the other word means. Okay, so if you see a sentence that starts with while or although, those words tell us that there is going to be a positive and a negative, or something like that. So if we know it starts with while, and then it tells us the word inconclusive, well, maybe we don't know what inconclusive is. But in the second part of the sentence, we've got definitive. So definitive is a good thing, yeah? Okay. So we know that because we've started with while, there's going to be a negative and a positive. There is a positive in the second part. So we know that the first part is going to be negative. So we know that definitive is the opposite of inconclusive. Inconclusive is the opposite of definitive. Okay. All right. So inconclusive means we do not have a definite answer for something. Okay. So look out for those things when you come across some difficult vocabulary during academic reading. All right, other things to help you with academic vocabulary. Now, one thing you should consider is the academic word list. So some very brainy person out there created a huge database of all of the academic words, all of the words that are used in academic contexts. Okay, and they put them in a big spreadsheet, they collected them together, and found that there are often some words that commonly appear only in journals and articles and textbooks and things like that. Okay, so these are words like analyze, like you can see on the screen, analyze, interpret, derive, context theory, etc., etc. Okay, so that is a tool which gives the word, gives meanings of the words, give pronunciations if you need them. They give definitions, they give other words which are connected to that word. So if you go to that website that is at the bottom of the screen, it lists all of these academic words based on how frequently they appear in academic reading. So number one would be those words which appear very commonly. The ones at the end in number 10 are those words which appear more infrequently, more rarely. Okay, and if you click on one of the words, it'll give the pronunciation, give the meaning, give synonyms, and it'll give connected words. So for analyze, you have analyst, analysis, etc., etc. So if you use the academic word list, it is a list of words that are used in academia, then it will be useful for you. It'll help you to remember it a bit more, will help you understand those words a bit more as well. Okay, so I suggest you use that. That'll be super useful for you. All right, but other things to think about. Okay, not just using the academic word list. All right. So the best way to learn vocabulary is to learn that vocabulary in its context. So make sure you are regularly reading academic texts, and they will give you a lot of this new vocabulary that you need to learn. Okay. So, for example, on our campus, we have business and management, health and social care, computing. Maybe you don't know too much about these things before you start, but by reading books from business management, you will learn business management vocabulary. And the same for the other topics. So only by looking at the texts that contain these words will you know what these words mean. Other thing you can use are flashcards, vocabulary apps. So have a look on your phone. You can use things like flashcard apps that have the word on one side, the meaning of the word on the other side. And by looking at these quite regularly, you can learn the meaning, attach them to the word, and remember them a lot more easily. Also, consider keeping a vocabulary journal. So anytime you learn a new word, write it down in your little notebook. Write down the meaning, write down the pronunciation, write how you can use it in a sentence. Maybe use some personal sentences about your own life that will help it to become more real in your mind, and this will help you to understand and remember more. Okay? So these are how you keep them in your brain. But we don't want to just keep them in your brain, we want them to use them. So make sure you use these words when it comes to writing and speaking. So if you have a seminar, try out using these words. If you've got an assignment coming up, use these words as well. If you know what they mean, you use them in your text and it shows that you know what those words mean. So we've just briefly touched on this idea of making notes. Okay, so you really should be, each time you're reading, note taking and summarizing. Now, there are lots of different ways you can do this. I'm not going to touch on this too much because you could kind of research this a bit more for yourself, but people take notes in different ways, and the different ways are useful for some people, not useful for others. Okay, so it's really about finding the type of note taking that really works for you. Okay, so like I said, have a look on Google, have a look on Wikipedia, etc. There are other encyclopedias available, by the way. Have a look at those websites, research these a little bit, and see which one you like best. But there is the Cornell method, which divides the page up into different sections in order to help you to remember where it is on the page, will then also tell you something useful for you. Then you've got the mind mapping method, or it's also called spidergram or spider diagram, things like this. This is more about being something very visual. So you've got a central part, other things come out of it, then other things come out of that, and that helps you to follow different arguments in that sense. Okay. All right, and then we've got the charting method. This is really more about comparing and contrasting information. Okay, so this is more really kind of a table of information where you can put advantages and disadvantages, etc. So have a look at them, see what works for you, and try them out. There are other ones as well. Okay, so just be mindful of that. So that is about note taking. Connected to that is summarizing and paraphrasing, because you're not just making notes for fun, you need to do something with those notes. So you've taken your notes. The next thing you really should be doing is summarizing and paraphrasing, which we'll come to in a second. Now, these will help you to take the information that you've looked at and to put them into your own words. If you can put them into your own words, that means that you fully understand and you can explain to other people. So, the most simple thing that you can do is try to summarize what you have read. So take what you have read and try to put it into 1, 2, 3 sentences and simply explain the main arguments, the main points of what you've just read. If you can do that, then it means you've understood it correctly. And in a similar way, if you are able to take what they've read and to rephrase it into your own words, this shows that you've understood, this shows that you have a good knowledge of academic vocabulary, and it will really help you to avoid any problems with plagiarism when it comes to writing your assignments. So we're coming to the end now, so let's consider the idea of dealing with difficult texts. So the texts that you're going to read they're not user-friendly to some extent, okay? If you're here in your foundation year or 1, 2, 3, the first, second or third year, the journals, the books are not necessarily created for you to read. They are they are created for people on master's degrees, PhDs, etc. So they're going to be a little bit above your level. But that doesn't mean you should not read them. It just means that it may take a little bit of time. It may take a little bit more effort in order to understand them. But that's okay. We're all here to learn. Okay? Well, I did it at university. You're going to do it here as well. It's still possible to do. So you've got this horrible feeling, oh my Lord, I've got to read this difficult text. But before you even start reading, consider some pre-reading strategies. Before you actually jump into it, think about what you could do to make the whole process easier. So, like we've mentioned dozens of times today, look at the titles, look at the headings, look at the subheadings to get a general sense, a general idea of what the text is about. Okay, let's be more efficient. Read the introduction, read the conclusion, get a general idea of what the arguments are in the text. Okay, have a look at any pictures, diagrams, graphs, data. Look at that data and see and read the little caption underneath. See if that tells you in a kind of easier way of what the text is about. Okay, usually a picture can describe something, whereas if you're writing that, it has to be thousands of words. Okay, also look at other things like bolded information or italicized information. They think that that information is going to be useful for you, so keep an eye on that information. Okay. And whenever you are reading one of these difficult texts, just consider, like, why am I actually reading this? What do I need to get out of this? Okay, keep that in your mind. Keep the purpose in your mind while you are reading it. If there's something you don't understand, maybe you don't need to understand it. Okay. If it doesn't help you to do the task that you need, then forget about it. You can always come back to it later on. Okay. So before you start reading the text, consider what you already know, consider what you need to know, and make sure you skim and scan and things like that. All right, so as you're going through, you should be annotating. Okay, not in the books. Again, if it's in the library, make sure you don't do that. But if you do have them, consider things like underlining important information, okay, or highlighting stuff if you've got those highlighter pens, etc. Make some notes in the margin, and don't just read a whole text, 3,000 words, and then try to write some notes at the end. It's going to be impossible to do that. So make notes as you're going, summarize as you go. Read a paragraph. Think about that paragraph. Make a little note or two. Move on to the next one. That will save you time and will help you to be more efficient. If it helps, use some little symbols. Okay, some I don't know, plus signs, cross signs, star signs, question marks, etc. Create your own system. Who knows? Okay, but just use that to make it quicker, more easier, etc. Okay, so lastly, let's have a look at some useful tools that you could use to really help you to go faster, to understand better, to get a better understanding. Let's have a go. Okay. So if you're looking to improve the speed at which you read, then you could use a speed reading tool. Now, again, I'm not recommending these to you. These are just some examples. If they're not on any app stores or whatever, not my problem. Okay. But these are just suggestions. Okay. They probably have some premium version. Maybe they have a free version. I don't know. Let's just try out for yourself. Okay, these different ones. Okay, so speed reading tools. So the first one we have here is Spreader. So Spreader gives you some little text, give you some little activities. They give you time limits, and they are all there to kind of not force you. That's not the word. Help you to read more quickly. All right. So some students have noticed that it is helpful for you if you really want to read big pieces of text in a short time and to understand them, of course. If we are talking about understanding stuff, maybe a reading comprehension tool might be more for you. So we have something here called Read Theory. So this is a free, or it was when I created this PowerPoint, a free online platform that has some comprehension exercises. So it'll give you a text, it'll give you some questions that you need to answer, and they will test your understanding of what you have just read. The other tools here on the right-hand side, so you've got your vocabulary building tools. We looked at the academic word list before, but things like Quizlet, we mentioned flashcards, so that is one of those sites that you could use. Word on one side, meaning on the other side. It will help you to remember the meanings of words. Okay. Now, the next thing, if you have some additional needs, maybe you get tired or you get a headache from reading so much information, what you can do is, instead of reading it, you could listen to it instead. So copy and pasting some text and then putting it into something called a text-to-speech tool will change the text to speech. Okay, so if you're on the bus or on the train or in the kitchen or whatever, and you can't really read a book, it's not very comfortable, use this tool, put the text in, and then a human or specifically an AI voice will read it out to you so you can listen to it wherever you are. So you can imagine this is very, very useful for you if you've got a busy life and you don't really have time to carry around books with you. All right. So if you would like to practice your skills more of academic reading, you can of course do some academic reading in your normal everyday life, but I've also created a little page for you here where if you scan this QR code, it will take you to a Google form. It'll have a little exercise where you can practice some of the skills that we've looked at today. Okay. All right. So good luck with that one. And do remember that your English support team is there to help you with all manners of different issues that come up with the English language. So as you can see there is both I and my colleague Christine, and we can be reached at englishsupport_manchester@esl.ac.uk. If you are on one of the other campuses, you have some other lovely English support tutors there, so please get in touch with them if you know their email addresses. Okay. If you don't, you can contact reception at any of those campuses. Okay, and we can help you with things like presentation skills, assignment skills, general academic skills like reading, which we've had today, or listening or note-taking, and we can always help you in person or online as well. So if that's useful for you, email that address that you see on the screen. And if you have enjoyed today's workshop, or maybe if you haven't enjoyed it, who knows? If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to a place where you can leave some feedback. You can suggest some things, you can rate what you saw, okay? And it's very useful for us so we can improve it, so we can provide you with the best possible service. All right. So thank you for watching this today. If you are watching this on YouTube, congratulations. If you're watching this through one of our VLE, virtual learning environments, then remember that you can always subscribe to the ESL English Support YouTube page, which is very helpfully called ESL English Support. That is at YouTube, so search for that and it should help you. That is ESL English Support. Type that into YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the videos, etc. And you can keep up to date with every single workshop that we do, also our top tips, also our podcast that we have as well. And you have all of the things there that really can help you with your English at Elizabeth School of London. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today. Hopefully it wasn't too long for you. Hopefully you've learned something from it. And yeah, thanks for attending, and I will see you all again soon. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.